Hello, welcome back to the channel. Well, I have here a 1941 Underwood Universal US Navy. So it has the US Navy logo both on the outside of the case by the handle and on the front of the ribbon cover. So this machine was made in around the spring or summer of 1941. This would be roughly 6 months before the United States entered into World War II at the end of 1941. And by early to mid 1942, most all typewriter manufacture had been redirected in the United States to armaments manufacturing. So this was already a Navy typewriter before World War II, or before the United States participation in World War II, which is very interesting. This is a gift. It was very dirty, and it took quite a bit of cleaning to get it to the condition it's in now. And I thought it would be fun to talk about the Underwood Universal. I used to have an Underwood Universal. I think it was back in 2017 when I first visited the Phoenix Type-In. I ended up selling my Underwood Universal to a local collector in the Phoenix area. But since then, I've kind of thought about the Universals, thinking, you know, they're very handsome-looking machines, and I didn't have one for a long while. Well, this one is really special, being a US Navy machine, and the fact that, well, I served in the Navy in the late 1970s. A little bit far removed from the era of this typewriter. But let's talk about the Underwood Universal and compare it against another Underwood portable in my collection, the predecessor to this machine, the Underwood Portable. Stay tuned. So the long history of Underwood portable typewriters, the 3-bank typewriter goes from like 1919 up to 1929. But in 1926, the 4-bank portables began. And according to the database, the way I understand it, the B series begins in 1926, and then the A series about a year later in 1927. So this typewriter is just above 500,000 in the serial number, so that puts it around 1930, and that would be the C series. So this is the C series, which went from 1930 to 1932. Then past the C series, we have the D series, the E series. The F series is where the first Universal branded portable was. There was a new E. There was a G called the Champion. There was a new F. There was an S called the Student Model. The L was the Leader. Anyway, all these portable typewriters go all the way up to 1941 in production. This typewriter, the Navy one, appears to be, it's an F series. It's the new F series, and it was made in 1941. The new F series went from 1936 to 1941, and it's also called the Touchmaster Universal, although this doesn't say Touchmaster, it just says Universal. So there's a long history going for from mid-1920s up to 1941-ish for these 4-bank Underwood portables. You might notice that both of them are resting on the case bottoms, and that is because the 1930 version Underwood portable has bolts or screws that secure the typewriter to the base. So to actually remove it from the base is a little bit more work, a little more effort. You have to use a screwdriver. So they kind of intended for you to operate it on the base. The lid just fits as a clamshell over on top of the typewriter. It's easy to take off. So just to be fair, I've also done the same with the Universal. I have it sitting on its case bottom. Well, stylistically, they are quite different. The portable from 1930 has this interesting curved shape around the top where the ribbon cover would have been. And it has individual ribbon spool covers instead of an actual ribbon cover. But if you look at the controls on the keyboard, both machines are very, very similar. So starting with, you have the space bar on the left side, upper row, next to the 2 key. You have a ribbon color selector on the right side of the frame, right of the keyboard. And on the portable, you have the color selector behind the right ribbon spool. There is a touch selector on the Universal, whereas the Portable from 1930 does not yet have the touch selector. A lot of differences, but a lot of the same things. The keys are the same arrangements. There are slight differences between the two keyboards right here. Notably, this 1930 version has a 3/4 key, so some of the individual characters in different places, but by and large, it's the same keyboard, same layout, space bars are the same width, etc. So the line spacing adjustment is on the left side of both, just by the left platen knob. On the older version, it's in front of the left platen knob. It's just a rotating lever that goes either in the up position is single line spacing and the down position is double. And on the Universal, it's single, up, double in the middle, and triple at the bottom. So they added an extra line spacing feature to the Universal by that time. You can also see the carriage return levers are a little bit different lengths. On the older version, it's shorter. They both have this kind of protrusion where you can kind of like karate chop with your fingers to do a carriage return. But on the older version, this extension up here is spring-loaded because when you put the case on, the case will push it down like that out of the way. So the case is a little bit more compact in size versus the Universal. This extension up here is fixed. It has a taller case. I also noticed that there was very little clearance between the bottom of the carriage return arm and the ribbon cover, although there's no scratching on the ribbon cover. But I also noticed that if you tighten down this shoulder screw, the pivot for the carriage return lever, too much, it'll actually bind the return. The arm won't spring back into the rest position. So I had to reform this arm a little bit to bend it up a little bit so it doesn't come quite as close to the ribbon cover. Oh yeah, another difference though is in the margin settings. So on the older Underwood, you have this exposed margin bar, this square bar with grooves in it, and the two margin adjustments, you just push down and slide them until they lock into a groove. Now on the Universal, it has a pivoting panel. The back paper support panel pivots back. So it does have the bar for the margin settings, but instead of pushing down on the margin adjustment, you have to pull it towards you. And I find there's just a very little clearance between the margin adjustment and the edge of the open panel. And it's kind of awkward to kind of pull it towards you and slide it. So in that respect, I find that the older Underwood 4-bank Portable has a little more easy to operate margin system. So as far as the platen rollers on both machines, they're both 9 inches wide and 1 1/4 inches or 32 millimeters in diameter, so the same size platen. Well, one of the noticeable things about these Underwood portable typewriters from this era is the paper bail. The paper bail on both machines fold forward toward the user, instead of the more common arrangement with many of these portables, which would be the paper bail flipping backwards. Also, there is a card guide on the 1930 and on the later Universal, and the distance between the card guide, the tip of the card guide, and the paper bail is maybe only 1/4 of an inch or so, which means when you start threading paper into the machine, once you get the paper past the tip of the card guide, if you don't have the paper bail already flipped towards you, the paper will probably hang up on the bail. And so you have to kind of remember ahead of time to pull the bail towards you before threading the paper in. Now, these machines do have the feature that when you release the paper release, when you pull that lever towards you, it does raise the paper bail. But then if you feed the paper in, because you don't have tension on the feed rollers, you can't easily thread the paper into the machine either. So it's one of those things where you just have to remember, flip the bail towards you before putting the paper in. This way the paper goes underneath the bail and then you can adjust it. So one of the things that's very similar on both machines is the margin release button, this little chrome or nickel plated button just above the backspace key on the left side. That will release your margin so you can type beyond the left or right margin. So another big difference is, of course, the Underwood Portable from the late 20s, early 30s has individual ribbon spool covers that you have to remove in order to gain access to the ribbons itself. And also, there's not a lot of clearance between the inside of the ribbon cover and the ribbon spool. So if you have a slightly warped or bent cover, you might find that the ribbon spool is rubbing against the inside of the cover and preventing the ribbon from properly advancing. So you might have ribbon advance issues as a result of that. On the other hand, the Universal has a more modern ribbon cover that flips up like that, gaining access to the ribbon. And on both of these eras of Underwood portables, the spools thread the ribbon from the front side or the user side of the spool up to the vibrator and back through the vibrator to the user side or front side of the other spool. This is in opposition to a lot of the other brands like Smith Corona notably, where they used the opposite pattern. They routed the ribbon from the back of the spools through the vibrator. So if you are rethreading a ribbon, especially a two-color ribbon, just remember that it has to wrap around the front of the spools in order to properly thread the ribbon. Both of these portable machines are carriage shift machines. And I find, just comparing these two without actually measuring the force on it, I don't have a force gauge, it feels like the older Underwood has a slightly lighter weight of carriage. The Universal is a little bit heavier, even though they're both the same platen size. So the paper bale on the portable has metal knurled rollers that can slide side to side for adjustment, whereas the paper bale rollers on the Universal have rubber sleeves, I guess you'd say, and they also slide on the paper bale for adjustment. So the carriage release lever on the Underwood portable from 1930, there is only a single button on the right side of the carriage, whereas the Underwood Universal, by the time we got to this era, you have a lever on both the left and the right side. So it's certainly more convenient to have two buttons, one on each side. That's really handy. One of the features I never really got along well with on these older portable typewriters were the paper fingers. And that's true with the earlier version of the Underwoods here. They had the paper fingers that slide back and forth. You know, the paper fingers work okay to hold a standard width letter size sheet of paper. But if you want to feed a narrower sheet of paper into it, by the time you move the fingers to hold the paper on the edge, you don't want the fingers interfering with the ribbon vibrator, which means you're going to need a wider margin on either side to prevent the interference. But on a narrow sheet of paper, you might not want wide margins, right? So I've always kind of not liked that. And also, by the time you have a typewriter with a paper bale, do you really need the fingers as well? I mean, we see this on the older Smith Corona portables where they had both the fingers and the bale, even the early Silent Supers from the 50s. Anyways, I don't really like the paper fingers, but it is a feature that's a carryover from probably the Underwood 3-bank machines of the 19-teens and early 20s. So one of the other differences between the earlier and the later Underwood portables is on the earlier ones, the shift lock feature could only be cleared with the left shift key, whereas on the Universal model, shift lock can be cleared with either shift key. So another distinctive feature of this series of Underwood portables is the ribbon manual reversing lever and manual advancing lever, which is on the right side of the body. So both machines, of course, have end-of-line bells, and oftentimes the tone of the bell varies not only from model to model, but from individual sample to individual sample. So here is the Underwood portable from 1930. Nice and brilliant and kind of sharp sounding, which is nice. And the Underwood Universal from 1941. A little bit more muted, not quite as brilliant sounding, but both bells still work fine. So the paper scales. On the 1930 version, the scale, the only scale, is down on the front of the carriage near the bottom. And the paper table doesn't have a scale at all. The paper table back here is about 1/4 of an inch wider than a letter-sized sheet of paper. And so when I put the paper in, I generally just center it evenly on that paper table, and that enables me to have pretty much a consistent margin on the left. Whereas on the Underwood Universal, you have a scale on the front of the platen down here, like that, front of the carriage. But you also have a centering scale back on the paper support table up here. So on the Universal, there are a set of centering scales on the back paper support table. They start at 0 on the outside. They go in 1/4 inch increments, 1 inch, 2 inch to 3 inch. And these are for centering paper, obviously. So with a US letter size sheet of paper, it is sized where if you put it at the 0 mark on the left, it'll match the 0 mark on the right, and you can just thread your paper in like that. You're already centered. But for some oddball sizes of paper, all you do is put the paper in and then adjust the centering left and right so that you have an equal amount of readings, equal amount of numbers on both sides. And then you know that you're properly centered. Like that. So the carriage scale on this pica machine goes up to 80 on the right-hand scale here. So that means that the halfway point, the midway point on the carriage is at 40. And so with your paper already centered using the centering scale on the paper table, you just simply set the carriage to the 40 mark, and now you're already in the middle of the paper. And this enables you quite easily to center titles or headings on your document using the centering scale on the paper table. So the escapement on these Underwood portables works such that as the typewriter approaches the print position about maybe a 1/2 inch in front of it, you can hear the escapement set, and then after it prints on the way back, it actually moves the carriage. Well, it's a good opportunity to do some test typing between both machines. We'll start with the older Underwood 4-bank, and here we go. So I've always found that this Underwood portable seems to be one of the best typing portables in my collection, despite its age. Certainly better than a Corona 3, better than one of the Remington portables from the 1920s. These just have a really nice touch. All right, this is the Underwood Universal US Navy version. Typing on this machine is almost the same as the earlier Underwood portable. It's a little slightly heavier touch, perhaps because the cleaning hasn't been done as well. It probably needs another round of degreasing. And also the carriage feels a little harder to do the return, even though I've cleaned and degreased the carriage bearings and also the spring motor, but it is a little heavier to operate. Again, it's just probably the difference in the condition of the machines. So I would be happy to use either of these Underwood portables. I think they're great little machines. I especially do like the looks of the lines on the Underwood Universal. I think it's a really handsome machine. I should mention on the Universal, when you want to remove the paper, pulling the paper release, it also pulls the paper bale forward. So you can just pull the paper out like that. And I should mention, in order to find the serial number on both the older Underwood portable and this Universal, is on the little bracket behind the left ribbon spool. The serial number is mounted at an angle here on a little plate. So both of these typewriters have a carriage lock on the left side underneath the left platen knob. You raise it up and it'll engage the carriage and lock it. And to release the carriage lock, just pull the carriage to the right and the lock will fall down and release. So I really think this is a lovely machine to add to my collection. It really brings me back to when I had the other Underwood Universal. This is in actually nicer condition overall. Aside from the platen is probably a little shrunk, and it's hard, of course, but it still operates pretty good. So aside from the US Navy markings, there's nothing really unusually outstanding about this typewriter. It was used by the Navy before the U.S. entry into World War II, and it's always interesting when I think about the history of typewriters. Where did this machine serve? Was it perhaps in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii on December 7th, 1941? We don't know for sure. Where did it serve after that? Was it stateside? Was it in Hawaii, or was it on a ship somewhere? We don't really know. And then how did it eventually get sold to a civilian, probably post-World War II, maybe government sales or whatever, came in the hands of a civilian. The person that I got it from had bought a large collection from another typewriter collector here in New Mexico a number of years ago, several decades ago. But where he got it from, we don't really know. So I don't know really the history of this machine per se. Now, perhaps if you remember the closing scene of the original Raiders of the Lost Ark movie, the Ark is in a crate and it's being moved down in a warehouse full of other crates to be stored away forever. And we don't really know, maybe there is in that same warehouse, I'm just imagining this, there is a filing cabinet full of paperwork, and in one of those folders is a piece of paper that tells the serial number of this machine and what the history is. But we'll probably never know where this machine served. But it is an Underwood Universal from 1941. It is an upgrade overall from the earlier four-bank Underwoods, which are one of my favorite machines. And I find this machine to be just about as good, basically, of a typer as the earlier four-bank Underwood, without the irritating paper fingers, but with a little slightly irritating margin adjustment system. But overall, I think you would be probably pleased to have this, or an Underwood Universal of any kind, probably a little bit better than an Underwood four-bank portable of the earlier era. I just think these are great machines, and perhaps underrated compared to other four-bank portables from the 1930s and 40s. And oh, by the way, I should mention, the typeface on this machine is upper and lowercase. It's a standard pica typeface. It is not a mill per se, meaning a typewriter with all uppercase used by radio operators. This was probably used by an administrative person, perhaps a yeoman. That's the administrative job rating in the Navy. So some yeoman was probably using this, I can only guess. I'd like to hear your thoughts about this down below. Please drop a comment. Let's have a discussion about these Underwood portables from the 1930s and 40s. And until next time, stay well, stay creative, and have yourselves a great day. And bye-bye for now.